Hi, this is Christopher Smith. I'm publisher of the American Cannabis Report. My guest today is Jessilyn Dolan. She is a registered nurse in the state of Vermont. She is the founder of the Vermont Cannabis Nurse Association and also founder of Nurse Grown Organics. Jessilyn, great to have you today. Thank you so much. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, we were really doing the legit coast to coast thing here. I'm in Southern California. You're in Northern Vermont. So we couldn't be more different in terms of the geography. What's it like up there now?
It's actually sunshine and a little bit warmer today, but that means we're in the 40s. So it's still chilly, I'm sure, for you.
40s is like people don't leave their houses. And when it's 40 degrees in Southern Cal, people don't go out of the house. They think that it's like an ice age has started. It's remarkable. Yeah, the full ski gear comes out at 40 degrees. So I would love to just be able to help people understand you and your background a little better. I was thinking of starting with the sort of alphabet soup that you wear after your name. For example, you have RN, CMT, CLD. So let's just go through them one at a time, because I want to help people understand who you are and all of the educational sort of hurdles that you've jumped and where you are in your professional career. So RN.
Registered nurse. That's pretty easy.
Oh, that was easy. And so, but what that is interesting to me, of course, in this context, of course, is you and I are in the cannabis community, and yet you're a registered nurse in the sort of Western tradition. I mean, you're a legit medical registered nurse, not just a cannabis nurse.
Right. Registered nurse was actually my second career. The next alphabet soup is, I believe, certified licensed massage therapist. So
okay.
I was a massage therapist and an herbalist, a yoga teacher, and working in the holistic realm before I went back to my second career in nursing school to become a nurse.
Okay. I just find that fascinating because there are so few, I mean, I guess you feel the same way. There's so few of you that have that sort of, I don't know, legitimizing effect of being Western certified, and yet you have whole plant medicine as part of your area of study and expertise. I just always find it's fascinating that only a few people really get the connection and are made the trip both ways.
Well, I feel like I almost went about it opposite of most medical professionals. Most medical professionals start their career young and find that it's not necessarily working. All the beliefs and medicinal practices they believed in for so long and were taught, and that brings them to plant medicine and to more natural and alternative therapies, where I came into it with a family that used cannabis as I grew up, with a great grandmother who was an herbalist. And I started my career with herbology, with alternative therapy. From there, went into mainstream medicine because I needed, as a single mom, needed the benefits, wanted the career. And that kind of together morphed into a beautiful, kind of what I'm doing now, and combining the two, like you said, combining Eastern and Western, combining allopathic and alternative, which I really think in a lot of ways is the absolute best medicine we can practice, is both plant medicine, but also honoring and respecting the science we do have when we need that as well.
I think that's a brilliant way to approach it, honestly, is to just use all the tools that we have. Don't cut ourselves off from centuries of learning and knowledge and treatment and success, certainly.
Right. And even my nursing career brought me in that same direction, from studying and working specifically with opioid use disorder, mental health comorbidities, a lot of pharmaceuticals and medication treatment on a daily consistent basis. That is also what helped circle me back around to plant medicine, kind of bringing me back to not only my roots, but to the roots of medicine in general.
Sure. Quite amazing. The next letters after your name, I see at least, is CMT. What do those stand for?
So that's certified massage therapist. I've been a massage therapist and energy and body worker since the 90s.
Understood. So, all right, next one was CLD.
I'm a certified labor doula. So I'm what we call a birth worker. I also train other people to do birth work and to be doulas. So that is kind of a lot of my heart and passion work. So
some people, well, at least who haven't been through a pregnancy or delivery recently, might not even recognize the name doula. I think sometimes that's a little fringy for some people. So tell us about what it's like to be a doula and how that fits in with the whole delivery process.
Yeah, so a doula basically is somebody supporting somebody. And in the birthing process, not everybody has a partner or has a partner, but they want someone else with more experience and education that can support them a little bit differently. So you can call them a coach, you can call, whatever term you want to use. It's usually a third party person that is not necessarily associated with the hospital or your medical team or medical professionals. They give educational, physical, emotional support, but the idea is the doula is supporting you to empower yourself, advocate for yourself, so that you walk away with that ultimate power and empowerment experience.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Anyway, thanks for explaining to me. I've been through it 3 times myself, but I still need that kind of clarification sometimes. So thank you.
I feel it's a lot like a bud tender, honestly. You do a lot of support and education. You don't give specific medical advice, but you meet people where they're at, hold their hand when they need it, and are along for the journey with them. So.
Wow. Yeah. Well, it's an absolutely hard job, but it must be incredibly gratifying. It's
amazing. There is nothing like it.
Fantastic. Now, I also understand you're a director of the ACNA, American Nurses Association, Cannabis Nurses Association?
Yep, the American Cannabis Nurses Association. We're a nonprofit group of nurses that are working to educate others, but also bring some credentialing to the cannabis nurse name and have annual conferences, and just a wonderful group of nurses with a really great cause and team.
I think what's so important about having nurses involved in our community specifically is just in my personal experience, doctors tend to be a little bit aloof. They sort of think that they're solving one problem, and then as soon as that either works or doesn't work, they leave the room. They the nurses will handle it, right? So I had my first child was in intensive care, right? NICU. It was, all nurses all the time, right? And they helped him and they brought him through. He's fine. He's great. He's in terrific shape now. But I just will never forget that the doctor was like, done, my job is done. And then, we were completely in the hands of the nurses, and it gave me a confidence in nursing that lasts till today.
Nurses are, I believe, the 19th year running now, voted the most trusted profession according to the Gallup polls. And I think, as you've mentioned, there's just a big difference between nurses and doctors. We spend the time, we hold the hand, we bend down on eye level, we answer all the questions, and, really meet patients where they're at. And I think have that ability more so than doctors do.
A couple of weeks ago, you and I were on Green Rush Live, I think, right, with Jimmy Young. And it was a big moment for me, only because I don't know if you remember this, but I brought up a subject that you and I have you have much more of an interest in than I do. But it was the concept of the endocannabinoid system in the context of cravings, really, right, during pregnancy. And I was amazed to see you do just that, like nod your head, like, how about, yeah. And I hadn't really had much experience asking the question to someone who could actually answer or who had an opinion. People were sort of like, theoretically, that sounds okay, but you have direct experience in this. And I thought that was fascinating.
Well, my experience likely is just theoretical as well, right? We don't have all the research that we want in pregnancy with cannabis use, let alone human milk feeding and cannabis use. So, but the concept of somebody having a endocannabinoid system that is not balanced, we know that is proven and that's true. So why would we think automatically because someone's pregnant, their endocannabinoid system is then balanced? It's not. If anything, that's more unbalancing to somebody's system. And we know if the endocannabinoid system is not balanced, there's going to be concerns, disease processes, just nausea, simply not feeling well. We could try to mitigate that with a lot of other medications and other ways. But if it's the endocannabinoid system that can be supplemented and supported with cannabinoids, that might not be the worst option for some people. I'm not going to ever recommend to somebody that is the best option and that is the safest option, because we can't prove that. But theoretically, it makes absolute sense. If you don't have a balanced endocannabinoid system, cannabinoids can help balance that out. Without balancing that out, you are going to be unhappy, unhealthy, not have the pregnancy you need or want for yourself or that child. then of course we have to address that and consider that and not write that off as a possible really good option for some families.
And in reading some discussion about your work in that area, I saw that you had said, I thought it was very interesting that you were saying that just that suggestion is kind of a big radical breakthrough for medical science. I mean, they are so stuck in their ways about thinking cannabis is bad, dangerous, bad for children, all that stuff. They're so locked into that even the suggestion that we crack the door open and say, we don't know enough to know whether it's all bad or all good or possible. We don't know enough. Just admitting that hopefully gets us on a path to discovery, right?
Absolutely. The first step is admitting we don't know it, right? And then we have to learn it more. And as you've mentioned, unfortunately, the research we do have, or what we've tried to prove up until this point, is how bad cannabis is, the only negative outcomes that are possible. So we've been looking for a specific hypothesis. We've been going for that hypothesis. The first step is really to change our minds and say, maybe we don't have to go in that direction. Let's at least ask the question neutrally. And then maybe moving forward, we can have more research and get more of those answers. So yes, I think it's a wonderful turning point in some ways that people are at least starting to question it rather than completely, use the dare approach here.
I think you're right. I think the dare approach is a great way to say it. There really isn't any evidence at all to say that it's absolutely dangerous. It's not like some of these other sort of chemistry experiments where patients have died and this and that. There's no legacy of that. There's no evidence that has ever happened. It's just fear, right? It's just fear, the fear of THC, right? The fear that it's going to reefer madness kind of a thing. It's going to have bad results. And that has, come down through the legend, especially I think in the medical community. It's just locked in as kind of a fact when in fact it's mythology, it's legend really. It's just not proven. How about that?
We're working on it and we're starting to see some big changes, which is exciting. And, that's part of my research that we've chatted about is seeing even sometimes those subtle or not so subtle changes in attitudes and beliefs and the way people are educated that will help us get to the actual clinical science, the research, the human research that we need and want really to take hundreds of years, if not longer, of research trying to demonize this plant instead.
Yeah, I really want to get to the next thing you just mentioned, actually, which is the recent presentation that you did in Tel Aviv, Israel at CanX 2022, which, if I recall, you were not even allowed to present this work in the United States. Is that right?
It's not that we weren't allowed to present it necessarily. We have not been successful publishing it here in the US through the traditional publishing routes, where 5 years previously we had no problems getting it published.
Very interesting. So the forces of the opposition are organizing maybe a little bit, but tell us more now about the paper that you presented, about the theory, about the work that's gone in behind it. And I really want to hear about CanX, and I really want to hear if you met the man himself.
Absolutely. So this is a research study from 2019 that I was a part of at a lactation conference where we surveyed hundreds of lactation professionals, asking their opinion on both their education level and then their recommendations to their clients based around cannabis use with human milk feeding, or what we call breastfeeding. The same research study we did 5 years earlier. The difference and the reason we repeated the study was because we wanted to do it post legalization in Vermont to see how legalizing it changed some of not only people's education, but their recommendations. We did find that 5 years later, there was some pretty significant differences. What we found was that in 5 years earlier, 15% of lactation professionals would say, absolutely, stop human milk feeding if you're using cannabis, not okay. Where less than 4% of people in 5 years later in 2019 had that stance. The other stance that was significant for us is that most people were very concrete in their thinking. They didn't necessarily think that there was a lot of other contributing factors, which we know with research, there's so many other contributing factors. That's why sometimes research is great research and it's not necessarily research we want to listen to or buy into, right? So what we found is that in 2019, almost 65% of the lactation professionals did feel that it was really factor dependent, where 5 years earlier, it was only 44% of people felt there was other factors that mattered when making that decision. So unfortunately, it's not a human clinical study. It's not easy to get, hands-on actual cannabis use with milk feeding studies. There's very few of those studies. But in my mind, this really plays on the education level and the recommendations, which all brings us back to stigma and those conversations. And if we're not having surveys like this and not educating people and not seeing that 5 years later, people are changing their opinions and what they're telling hundreds of clients out there, if we don't know that these changes are happening, we can't help have those conversations and break that stigma and really move forward with recommendations for, lactation and for pregnancy, let alone in many other situations that we're also lacking the research, unfortunately.
Well, the medical community, I think, in Israel is far advanced, far ahead of us, I believe, in terms of the understanding of, well, everything having to do with chemistry, medicinal chemistry. The endocannabinoid system was discovered there, as we talked about. I did mention, I was curious whether you met the man himself. Did you?
Unfortunately, he Zoomed with the conference this year.
I think I knew that.
Not feeling well enough to make the trip from Jerusalem and come and see everyone. So I was very disappointed I didn't get to meet him in person, but I was also, very understanding and excited to meet everybody else there that's on his team, a group of wonderful scientists and researchers. So
he's 94, I think, right? We're 90 something? 93. Okay. Yeah. And it was up there. Yeah. We're in case anyone doesn't know, we're secretly giving secret signals on Dr. Raphael Meshulam, who is the founder of the endocannabinoid system. And depending on who you hear it from, he discovered THC and CBD and the receptors, the CB1, CB2, and how the functionality, how all those things work together. I know that there was other work going on in other parts of the world, but he is certainly known as the godfather of all of it, I think.
Absolutely. And I have to say, it's an absolute honor and highlight to have my research published through Raphael Meshulam and his team, where we're still have not had it yet published in the US here. So.
Well, it's really incredible. And it was when you mentioned that a couple of weeks ago, I realized that I'm speaking with a world-class person. A person who's working at that level. No, I'm really serious. We talked about earlier about how the CanX conference is really not that big, actually, in terms of numbers. You said, I think, about 400 people, which doesn't sound like a lot, but 400 of the very best minds in the world working on something are going to be much more successful and influential than, 10,000 people in Las Vegas, walking around looking at the cool new bongs, right? I mean, so it's concentrated talent and experience, which I think is really the whole point. And the fact that you were there is quite a feather. It's quite a feather in your cap.
Well, thank you, sir.
Well, excellent. Let's see. You had talked also about, let's go back to Vermont a little bit. And in an article that I was reading about you were very specific about some of the strategies that I guess they're called the Cannabis Control Board. There seems to be a disconnect between what's already happened with the hemp regulations and the hemp experience, and now what they're trying to sort of ram through for cannabis, right? And those disconnects are causing some real fundamental problems that a lot of people aren't recognizing. Do you want to talk a little bit about, there were two things I think I remember you mentioned in particular. One was about testing, the quality of testing on the cannabis side versus the quality of testing on the hemp side. And the other was not, on the cannabis side, not having a qualified medical professional with experience in cannabis serving on the regulatory board and being able to have input into those things. So those are the two things that stuck out to me, and there might even be more.
Yes, unfortunately, all we have here in Vermont currently is a medical program. As of May 1st, the medical dispensaries will be able to sell to adults As of October 1st, other licensees, so adult use purveyors, will be able to sell to adults. The medical dispensary is getting quite a jump here on the adult use market. Our medical dispensary here in Vermont has never had to have third-party or contaminant testing for any of their cannabis.
Really?
So, right. So all they have been mandated to report is THC levels that they test themselves. So there is a lot of talk and truth to Vermont medical cannabis programs having, unfortunately, not very high quality cannabis at all, let alone mold and other contaminant issues in their products. So the medical dispensaries here have not been held to a high standard, if much of a standard at all, where the hemp program here in Vermont for the last couple years has implemented testing standards, encouraging. I don't believe they have had the bandwidth to ensure necessarily compliance for every farmer, but mandating and expecting full panel testing as far as specifics to the end product. So flower would have mycotoxin testing, where if you already tested for one thing, you might not have to test it in the end product of another. But the overall concept is that the hemp program here has mandated lab testing compared to the medical program, which does not. So our hemp program has went above and beyond trying to ensure consumer safety as compared to the medical program. As we move forward with the adult use market coming online, the Cannabis Control Board, I believe, is adopting the same standards of the hemp program, with the exception that medical dispensaries do not have to do that testing unless they also get an adult use license. So there is, moving forward, chance that medical patients at a medical dispensary will continue to purchase products that have very little, if any, lab testing at all.
Well, that's just, it doesn't make, I mean, the way to hear you say it, of course, you can't make any sense out of it, right? It doesn't make sense at all. It's completely, in fact, against logic that a medical dispensary would have lower testing values than an adult. It doesn't make any sense at all. You can't, like you could, oh boy. The other issue that I saw, and again, this is not to limit what's actually happening, but just the two that jumped out at me. The other was that in terms of the representation on the regulatory board itself, you were saying that there aren't any medical personnel with real experience in cannabis advising the rest of the board. I mean, that's a giant blind spot, don't you think?
Absolutely, absolutely. Unfortunately, the patient representative is a patient, but not anyone, that has medical professional experience. There is one appointment for a doctor, but it's, again, not a doctor that has any experience in cannabis. They have experience, with substance misuse and things like that, unfortunately. So yeah, we're really lacking a big part of an important part of the advocating, but also educating that not only the Cannabis Control Board needs, but the program in general could use to build a stronger foundation from the beginning.
Well, we've seen this over and over all across the country. When you have a very conservative medical person, Western trained, but conservative by nature and with insurance concerns, and there's probably the legal team from the state government saying you can't say this and you can't say that, whatever. So they're really trying to ride this really narrow rail, which doesn't serve patients. It certainly doesn't help the community or the industry, but that's actually, I think, secondary. It doesn't help the patients when they don't get access, right?
Right. Our program in Vermont here is extremely restrictive. It's one of the most restrictive in the country. We only have 2 plants that you're allowed to grow as a patient. You can only have 1 caregiver. We have a very short list of disease processes that allow you to get the verification to even get your medical card. So unfortunately, we have a very, very small and tight program here, and we do need to see a lot of changes to really be able to support that patient much better.
How long, Jessilyn, has it been since you've had the medical program in Vermont? When was medical approved?
I believe it was 2004, but it wasn't for several years after that till we actually had dispensaries you can shop at. Then you were
Yeah.
only allowed to either grow or shop at the dispensary for quite a long time. So you had to make that distinction and that choice. And we notably have a very conservative house when
Okay.
looking at putting bills in and trying to change the medical program here and make it for the better, and have not been successful for many years really updating or making any positive changes to the program. Unfortunately, we have a lot more changes and things that need to happen, and hope we can do that in the next couple of years with a few different switches with legislators that will be happening.
Well, and there's so much opportunity for, we would talk about, I think of the cannabis community as one sort of way of thinking, or one sort of group, and the cannabis industry as a kind of another way of thinking, really. That's like the business school thinking, that's your profit and loss kind of people, really. But when we talk about the community, we're talking about people who are patients and care providers like yourself, and people who are operators, but it's not all about the profit and loss, It seems to me that when laws are so restrictive as you're describing, that it only encourages the illicit market. It only encourages people to go buy from the local dealer, right?
Right.
Well, why does
Absolutely.
that? And that doesn't help anybody.
Well, that's created by lack of access, and lack of access comes from a program that doesn't have enough education to have patients feel supported. It comes from a program with a lack of quality in their products, which has absolutely been a concern here. Comes from a program people can't afford the prices, and cannabis here in Vermont from the medical dispensaries is extremely overpriced and unaffordable to many of our patients, as this is a federal, if not international, crisis as far as access financially to cannabis medicine. So you're right, by not having a good program, all you're doing is encouraging an illicit market. And I think part of what I would really like to see is people that want to become a medical patient and have incentives to become a medical patient here in Vermont. And we have seen year after year, our numbers of medical patients steadily decline because they don't have any incentives. There's not a reason to be a medical patient here in Vermont right now. But with the adult use market coming online, we have very strict THC caps coming our way. Not having flower above 30%, that's one thing. Not allowing concentrates above THC above 60% basically takes the concentrate market and makes it not even an option in an adult use. So a patient can go to a medical dispensary and get those concentrates. So that will be an incentive for a Vermont patient to go to the medical program and get a card and get their concentrates. But if they're not testing in the medical program, there's no consumer safety. If it's not affordable, they still can't access that. So the way Vermont is setting it up right now, unfortunately, might not be what we all think is the best way to go about it.
Yeah, the THC cap to me is a very interesting argument, and I think a lot of people don't quite understand I think that the theory is actually ultimately very simple. Right, which is that in other medications, let's say take pain medication, take opioid medication that you might need, let's say for after surgery. Well, there isn't a cap on the amount of pain medication. It's probably based on a formula of your weight and your age. I'm guessing something like that. But there isn't a broad cap on pain killing, because pain killing is okay. Pain killing is a good goal. It's a decent and humane goal. That's why the medicine is invented. But only in cannabis world do we have this idea that we have to cap the amount of possible pain killing medication. To me, it's another throwback from reefer madness and the fear of THC, the fear of letting people get high, when sometimes that's actually exactly what they need.
And it's a misunderstanding and a lack of education when you think of what a concentrate is. Of course, somebody is led to believe it's just to get you really high, and that's the only purpose. When you talk about not only, historical and old school hash and things like that, you can also look at the concentrate allows me to consume less material. So I want to do that for a medicinal aspect and in a more medicinal way for some people. So I think it's a lack of education and understanding as to why and how we use concentrates. It's not necessarily what everybody thinks. And especially when it comes to legislators, they're seeing and thinking in one direction. They're not hearing, as they should, from, you know, patients. Like I have one patient in particular, a fabulous, you know, older lady who will talk to legislators about, I use hash because I can take 1 or 2 puffs of my hash, feel comfortable, do what I need to do,
Right.
instead of inhaling an entire joint worth of, you know, flower. So I think
Right.
it's that lack of understanding, unfortunately, that is continuing to allow reefer madness and stigma around concentrates versus, you know, another way of combustible consumption.
And I think a lot of these legislators almost solve problems via spreadsheet. They don't actually solve via, like, the body chemistry is far more complicated than this. So like if you have a higher THC product, let's say it's 60%, like you just, as an example, 60% take as a number, and you have a 30% product, it doesn't necessarily mean that this one is twice as powerful as this one. It doesn't necessarily mean that's how your body interacts with it, right?
Well, what we're learning is that it's not just about the THC. We have to stop concentrating on the percentage of numbers and understand the entire experience, which is the combination of the terpenes and the THC and what else is in that product. When we have a concentrate that is only 60%, what fillers and additives are in there to make that 100%? So what is that other 40%? That's the larger concern when we're talking about, you know, some of these amended and altered products, to then be able to pass regulation based on a percentage that is not natural and norm for that whole plant medicine. So really it comes down to, again, understanding whole plant medicine versus other ways we can use this product. Not only ways we can use it, but what we've done to alter that product.
And that's exactly why, by the way, I mean, that is a perfect explanation of why we need people with medical experience like you have and plant experience like you have to be able to help people understand what really is happening, not just explain it again with like your abacus or with your spreadsheet. You know, this number is twice as high, therefore, oh my gosh, you know, that kind of thing. And we just saw this, as a matter of fact, play out in Mississippi not too long ago, probably 2 months ago. The governor of Mississippi got a spreadsheet and figured out that if you're allowed to have this much cannabis per day, then he asked someone, well, how many joints could you roll with that? And the person said like 11 joints for that. And no one who uses cannabis agreed. They all said you could roll like 2. But he got in his head it was 11. So what he did was he multiplied 11 joints every single day times the number of patients that he anticipated. And then his proclamation to the state was, we're going to have like 10 million joints floating around Mississippi now. And therefore, it's going to lead to the destruction of Mississippi, and people aren't going to go to work anymore. And we're all going to be laying around stoned all the time. And I'm not going to allow that. And
I'm moving to Mississippi.
Oh, first of all, leave Mississippi. I think you'll be in better shape first. But second of all, it's that spreadsheet way of thinking, right? That this makes 11 joints times 300,000 or 3 million, whatever, you know, leads to some kind of like tidal wave or something, you know, and it's absurd, right? It's crazy on its face, but that's the governor. This is the highest elected official in the state saying this kind of nonsense.
I've found myself mentioning a few times to people recently that in the cannabis industry, we need to be a little more fluid and flexible and think outside the box. And and that's exactly what I'm thinking of as you're talking about spreadsheets and this concrete needing to know specifics. That's not the idea of plant medicine, of holistic medicine, of natural therapies, of things like that, that takes us back to the nature and not having, you know, those definitions of spreadsheets and numbers and things like that. And that's just not a comfortable place for a lot of people, and not a place people can project and look at things, let alone laws, into the future. But again, it's really just continuing to have these conversations over and over. People need to hear it more than once, more than twice, more than 3 times from other people. That they need to hear it from a nurse and a doctor and, you know, politicians and patients, and hear a lot of different stories. And then the idea is hopefully eventually we'll continue to break this stigma as we've gotten to where we are, which wouldn't have happened without the education and the grassroots advocacy that, you know, we've been a part of, other people have done before us. So, you know, I truly hope we just have to keep keep talking the talk, walking the walk. The more people that will listen and the more times and the louder we can say it, then we'll eventually get there. And hopefully this conversation will be very different 5 years and then 15 years from now.
I sure hope so. I think myself that, like, one of the things I talk about in my news presentations quite often is the simple fact that if human beings have been cultivating cannabis for 12,000 years and no one has ever died from an overdose, then I think it's safe to say, because humans are remarkably competent at being stupid, they're remarkably capable at doing dumb stuff, that if it were possible to overdose from cannabis, someone would have done it. I think, therefore, the extrapolation has to be it's not possible, right? It cannot be done. Because, I mean, you read about some of the things that people do. They want to fly, so they tie balloons to their chair, and then they take a gun with them so they can shoot the balloons one at a time and then come back down. Of course, so human beings are amazingly creative at how dumb they are. And certainly with drugs, I mean, people overdose on stuff all the time, but never on cannabis.
Right.
I think that's got to be like statement number one. You cannot overdose from it. So let's start from there.
I couldn't agree more. And that's one of my pet peeves when I look at educational platforms such as like the Vermont Department of Health and how they educate our kids and families around substance use. Can we at least explicitly explain very clearly that if grandma switches from Percocets to cannabis and it's still a controlled substance, we don't have to worry about grandma not breathing anymore and overdosing? And that's always something I've wanted people to explain better when we're talking to children, because it worries me that children put it in the same category. So when they do see grandma switch from one medication to another, I hope they feel more comfortable, at least about that long-term, overdose safety concerns that we can take off the table.
And that's another one of your areas of expertise, I believe, is addiction and that kind of thing. So you're not just sort of wishing, as a casual observer, you're deeply immersed in this way of thinking and the relative dangers of certain drugs, and I go to probably nicotine and caffeine and alcohol and all the all down the line, all the way to sugar and all the rest. But you're also an expert in that area as well. So you're not just sort of giving your sort of flyby thinking on that.
No, as a nurse, most of my career, I've specialized in substance use disorder, mostly opioid use disorder, and specifically in the pregnant population, and then withdrawing newborns after birth. So I've really been ingrained in a lot of this work, and I've seen some of the absolute worst case scenarios and worst outcomes. Yeah. I have also seen successful outcomes with, using pharmaceuticals and methadone and medications we do need way above and beyond cannabis. I've also been in the situations where I've worked with clients to recognize cannabis is not a safe and good option for them for some reason. So I feel I have a great breadth of experience, and I'm very grateful to that I can, most of the time, more than not, come from a pretty neutral understanding and background from experience and education perspective around substance use disorder, and looking at the pros and cons and, really the different ramifications along a big continuum when it comes to opioids, when it comes to cannabis, when it comes to using in the family scenario from children to elderly. So I really try to have that neutral understanding, because like I've mentioned, there are people cannabis is not appropriate and not a great option for, but we also really need to continue to understand and work with the difference and teach the difference between cannabis and opioids and why that is so important as we continue along this, pandemic, epidemic, whatever we're calling it at this point. I think it changes, based on state and year as far as opioid overdose fatalities and how cannabis can be a support system and really change that for so many people.
I think it's so important the way you describe that, actually, in that you put it in context, really, that you're not a person, clearly with your experience, you wouldn't be, but I think it's just important to point out that you're not saying cannabis is the solution for everything. Some people are so gung-ho about it that they really believe cannabis is absolutely the solution for everything. And you're saying it's just like anything else, it's case by case, but it should be in our tool set.
Absolutely. And if we don't have an open mind to that tool in that toolbox, we're missing an enormous, fabulous tool. Absolutely. More often than not, cannabis can be an adjunct in supportive therapy. Is it the cure all? No. Is it the end all? No. For some people, it is, but not for everybody. And recognizing that and honoring that, I think, is honoring really our individualities and understanding life cycles and processes, right? Like, we really need to get back to when we talk about plant medicine, I can't not talk about the earth. Plant medicine is earth medicine, and it's really respecting those boundaries and honoring those differences amongst plants, the earth, ourselves, and working together to create a holistic care plan. I had a friend, nurse colleague, recently remind me, and I needed the reminder that if you need pharmaceuticals and chemical medication, that's also being a holistic nurse, because you're using every tool in your toolbox and you can't discount that when you really do need that. So, you know, anybody that's discounting pharmaceuticals, fabulous, wonderful. I hope you can use just plant medicine. But again, being open to and understanding to how we use those tools in the toolbox, just as any doctor or nurse or practitioner, you know, that refuses to have an open mind and even think about or look at cannabis, they're not using all the tools in their toolbox. They're not meeting people where they're at. They're not, in my mind, being realistic where medicine and people are going right now. And as you've mentioned, you're just hurting the patient at that point. So we really need to have that open mind to be there for our patients.
I like the way you've said that. And I also, you know, you hear this, I'm sure, a lot, you know, the legend of cannabis, the myth of cannabis is that it's a gateway drug, which to me, as a sort of a storyteller person, you know, I recognize a keystone into a religious dialogue when I hear it. You know, gateway, there's only one gateway, right? In all of our sort of Western Christian rights, the gateway to hell, right? Gateway to hell. So when they assigned the word gateway to cannabis, it was very specifically chosen, I think. And I mean, in the darkest but best use of propaganda. I mean, I think the propaganda campaign that started around cannabis in the 30s, all of it, you know, that you'll become violent and you'll become insane and uncontrollably sexual, and it's a gateway to, and they don't even have to finish the sentence because, you know, Christians are like, I know where this is going. Oh my God, right? But it's not, clearly, it's not a gateway. It's in many cases an exit, which I always find a fascinating way to say it. It's not a gateway drug. It's an exit drug for many people to get them out of trouble of other drugs that they can't handle for whatever reason. And
it's an exit drug to a lot of pharmaceuticals. At the same way, I do see it as an entry drug, but in a positive way. I've always joked around, CBD is an entry to chamomile, because some people are following the national hype about hemp and CBD and saying, oh, well, maybe I will try chamomile at bedtime as well. And maybe rosemary could help for a headache. And what are some other options? So I do see cannabis as sometimes the first entry of somebody accepting natural and alternative medicine and being more open to maybe getting a massage or acupuncture or going to the herb store and picking not just cannabis, but some other herbs that might help for clearing, you know, phlegm if you're getting over a cold or for your digestion. Peppermint is fabulous. Why not try that if you're using cannabis for digestion concerns? So I do see it as this beautiful entry drug into some of our, you know, plant medicine, basically.
That's a wonderful way to say it. I wanted to also not miss the opportunity to talk about nurse-grown organics. That is your company. I guess you're also, so not only are you so skilled and experienced in the medical pursuits, but you're also a grower. So you're literally hands in the dirt, also growing as well. So let's talk a little bit about what you're doing. How I'm guessing you probably don't have, you know, 100,000 acres out back kind of thing, but if you've got enough product to be actually selling product, you must have a nice size setup. And tell me what you're doing.
Absolutely. We've been growing hemp for 5 years now. We're Vermont's first clean green certified hemp farmers, which I'm really proud of. And we started a line because after doing my research and looking for products I could recommend to other medical professionals, families, and friends, I couldn't find anything that I fully trusted that had the lab testing and was formulated and extracted the way I really wanted. So I started Nurse Grown Organics about a little over 2 years ago. We have a nurse affiliate program because we believe in education. So most of it goes and is sold through other nurse affiliates. You know, we have CBD, CBG, CBN, kind of some nice mixes, some salves and massage oils because I'm a massage therapist and love that. And cultivating is at my absolute favorite, my love. We hope to get into the adult use market here as cultivators in the near, not so distant future. Yeah, and are really excited to also offer some other nurse education. We're hoping to do a nurse hotline here in Vermont specifically to educate and advocate for patients and a couple other things as Vermont comes into an adult use market.
That's another, I'm so glad you mentioned that last part. Let's go back, let's put a pin in the idea of the 911, because I have actually a little bit of a similar situation to that. But what also, I spoke with a fellow in Vermont on, there's this social media, social audio, they call it, called Clubhouse, which is kind of just like this, a Zoom call, except for the camera part. It's just audio. Anyway, so Clubhouse is, I think, maybe the 5th largest social media. It's very friendly to cannabis because people just talk about stuff. There's nobody selling anything. No one's showing anything. You can't see anything. So we're just talking. So therefore, it's a big platform for talking about cannabis. And I'm not sure. I'm going to get back to that in a second. The 911 idea. I was really fortunate to be consulting with a Middle Eastern country near where you were just a couple of weeks ago, nearby. Well, it's all kind of nearby over there, I guess. But I was consulting with this country because they were trying to legalize hemp and then develop hemp into an industry and a kind of resource for the people. And one of the things I suggested to them was that they needed to get coordinated with their 911 call center. As it becomes legalized, people might not know what to expect. Right. They might call the emergency. And we see this all the time with edibles here in the US. Now over there, they're only going to be having hemp. So we're not going to have high THC at all. So I wouldn't expect any of those situations, but in case they did, and I went and met, there's actually a company that sort of leads the 911 kind of a thing. So we worked out together, how do we develop information? If people call and say this happened, what do I do? Just to make sure that it's within their whole structure. Mm-hmm. So when I saw you said the same thing, I felt very smart.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Yeah, we're just kind of putting some ideas together. I know the Vermont Cannabis Control Board loves the idea of something patients and people can call to get free information. Of course, who wouldn't? So we're working on looking for support and some partners as far as some of the adult use community retailers and educating them and helping to educate their patients and hoping to really, not just patients, consumers, because I always say there's a lot of people that do not consider themselves patients and are consuming cannabis, but likely could be considered a patient. 7 out of 10 people are on pharmaceuticals. So there's a chance 7 out of 10 people consuming cannabis are taking pharmaceuticals. So in my mind, that makes them a patient. Anyone who's using cannabis instead of a sleeping pill or a beer, they're using it medicinally. So whether we call them a patient or not, I really look at consumers need the support, whether they consider themselves a patient or not. And I'd love to help and be that support line to really, give non-biased, evidence-based information and education that meets people where they're at. I think that is key.
I think that's so important. I remembered now, luckily, what I was going to say before was, I had been speaking to a guy on Clubhouse, and he said he had an acre of land, and he was in Vermont. He was near Middlebury, this guy in particular, but he was trying to figure out how to make sort of a business about it. Like, what should I do? And it occurs to me that the farm to table concept is such a big deal, especially out here in California, probably in Vermont too, I'm guessing.
We're trying for cannabis.
And if you could have that with cannabis, I think that would be a miracle for some people, honestly, to literally see it grow, to smell it, feel it, all of that, and then be able to go to the table and have some extract, or perhaps have it sort of as a vegetable almost, hemp leaves or something like that, as on or part of their salad or something like that, and just see how useful it is as a whole plant before it's been decarboxylated and all the, we get all these other different chemicals that come afterwards, but just the raw plant and that raw experience, I think that would be one of the greatest things ever.
And that is something us grassroots advocates here in Vermont are pushing for, is that farm to table. So that is something we hope to see come online in the next year or two. Let's just hope for the best here in Vermont.
Wouldn't that be amazing? Now, so you must grow everything. I have
to get running on you, because if I don't leave in the next like 2 minutes, I'm going to be super late for my kid.
Okay. Nope. Sorry. I know this went on longer than I thought it would, but I'm sorry. Excuse me, but you're a little bit interesting to talk to. So I was pretty excited.
We can do it another time. I just booked it for the time slot to get the kids. So
totally okay. Then let's let you go now for sure. It's been really wonderful talking to you. Thank you so much. We had so many different ways to connect. I just, I couldn't run out of ideas or things to ask you. So, anyway.
Well, thank you for having me. And I'm sure there's 20 other things I would love to chat with you more about, and we could have fabulous conversations. So anytime, I'd love to do it again. But thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Jessilyn. This was an incredible conversation, and I look forward to more. That was, once again, people, that was Jessilyn Dolan. She's a registered nurse from the state of Vermont. She's the founder of the Vermont Cannabis Nurses Association and the founder of Nurse Grown Organics. Remember to like, share, and subscribe this show and all the shows from Pro Cannabis Media. And one more thing, a great thanks and shout out to the great people at Pro Cannabis Media. That'd be Dan and Isabel and Jimmy Young. Christopher Smith here, publisher of the American Cannabis Report. See you soon.